Okay. Well, hello and welcome to the Extreme History Lecture Series. My name is Crystal Alegria and I am the director of the Extreme History Project. Our mission at Extreme History is to make history relevant. And we do that in a lot of ways, including this lecture series, but also with our historic walking tours that we do through the summer months, through a new podcast that we have called The Dirt on the Past, through workshops where we dive into history in a lot of different ways, through bus tours. We hope to resume those next summer. So that's what we do. Extreme history in all different ways, formats, fashions, any way that we can get history to the public is what we do. Tonight, I'm so excited to have Paul Stouffer and Susan Anderegg. Is that right? I said it right before.
Yeah, well, the first time.
I said it right the first time, right? We're so glad to have you guys with us tonight, but I just have a few housekeeping tips to get to before we get to Paul and Susan. We are in webinar format tonight, so you can hear us, but we can't hear you. So if you have questions, please write those in the Q&A box that you can access at the bottom of your screen. If you have thoughts and comments during the presentation, you can use the chat button, also located at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the presentation tonight, you can ask questions and I will help facilitate those to Paul and Susan. If you have questions that pop up during the presentation, feel free to write them in the question and answer of the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end. So as the summer winds down, our walking tours are starting to wind down as well. Our walking tour season officially ends on Labor Day weekend. So if you haven't had a chance to take a walking tour, I highly suggest that you do it in the next few weeks. We have our normally scheduled tours that happen on Fridays. We have a red light district tour that happens at 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon. We have a Murders, Madams, and Mediums walking tour that happens on Friday and Saturday nights at 7. We also have a Main Street tour that happens on Sundays at 1, and our very popular cemetery tour that happens on Sundays at 4 p.m. We also have our walking tour Wednesday, and this walking tour Wednesday, August 25th, we're going to have a tour at 6 p.m. that is called Hidden History Rediscovering Bozeman Creek. And Cheryl Hendry, who many of you know, is going to be leading that tour this Wednesday at 6 p.m. So hopefully you can join us for a walking tour. We'd love to see you before the season is over. I can't believe it's almost over. Cheryl, if you could put in the chat the link to the walking tours, that would be great. And you can sign up online, get your tickets ahead of time. That really helps us. I also wanted to talk a little bit about our Extreme History Project used bookshop that we have at our location at 234 East Mendenhall. We have a wonderful used bookshop of curated used history books that focus on Montana history, Indigenous histories, women's history. We have a great collection that we've been gathering over the last few months. So stop in. We're open at the Extreme History Project on Thursdays from 10 to 3, Fridays from 10 to 3, and then Saturdays from noon to 5. And then, of course, we're also open Friday nights and Saturday nights for our walking tour. So if you want to come in at that time as well, you can grab a used history book. We have some great ones. We have a lot on Lewis and Clark. We have a lot of great women's history books as well. So come in and check it out and pick up some reading material for these rainy Bozeman days that we've been having. So thanks to you who, I also wanted to say thanks to everybody who has recently renewed their membership. And I don't know if everyone out there knows about the Extreme History Project membership program, but if you don't and aren't a member, you should become a member. There are some great perks, like you get $2 off walking tours and a few dollars off admission to the Gallatin History Museum here in Bozeman. So check it out. Cheryl's going to also put that in the chat, the link to the membership program. So become a member. It really helps us keep these lecture series going and keep our walking tours going and keep all the things that we do kind of running. It really sustains us. So thank you so much for that. So I'm so excited to have Paul and Susan with us here tonight. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Paul and Susan if you don't know them already. Susan and Paul have been married since 1985. Congratulations to you both on that. They've called Bozeman their home for the last 20 years. Susan is a retired graphic designer now engaged in her own creative ventures, which is super exciting. She loves to find things that other people might walk by and never notice. A Montana State University alumnus, Paul was an inspiring journalist before spending the last 40 years in the tourism and hospitality industry. As long as he can remember, he has had a passion for every facet of American history. The idea for this book had been formulating for many years after Susan first saw the round feature on the wall of a downtown building, number 27 in the book. And they might be speaking about that round feature tonight, so keep your ears open for that. And Susan challenged Paul to find the story of this round feature. Although the circle of bricks and wood remains a mystery, it inspired Susan to seek out and photograph dozens of other unique features around town, each with a challenge to Paul to find and briefly document its story. It was the perfect pandemic era project. So I'm so glad to have Susan and Paul here tonight to talk about this book. I've seen this book in development over the last year or two, and it's been so fun to visit with Paul as he comes in, as Susan has sent him on a trek to find information about a certain object, and he would come in and visit with me and others about it. So it's been really fun to see this book in creation, but also to see the book in reality. You know, it's always fun to see a project come to fruition. So thank you so much, Paul and Susan, for agreeing to do this presentation. And with that, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, I get to start because, okay, I'm Susan, obviously, and this is our book. As Crystal said, I'm a retired graphic designer, overall creative person, and this is the book that I have been wanting to do for quite some time. I'm gonna just warn everybody, I've never done anything like this before, so just be patient if the slide goes the wrong way, or I get flustered, or I skip something. So anyway, so welcome to Where in Bozeman, a short history of Bozeman in 51 photos. So this kind of started, oopsie, there, told you. So years ago, back in my younger days, like in elementary school or junior high, and maybe everyone has seen these kind of things, but I've always been a big fan of visual puzzles. I've never been big on word puzzles or number puzzles, but I love these visual things. And maybe you've seen some of these. The one on the left, that is somebody in a sombrero riding a bike. You're looking down on them. And the one on the right is a giraffe walking by a window. And I've always been fascinated by these visual things that you should know what they are, but you don't. So, oops, there we go, I told you. So when I go out for a hike and I happen to have my camera with me, I can drive my hiking partners nuts because I can stop and take a photo of one thing for a half an hour and be perfectly happy. I really love pictures of when trees are down. They have such great texture and interesting things happening. And for instance, this, I took a picture of this from many different angles. To me, it reminds me of maybe an aardvark coming out of the wood. We went hiking couple months ago, months and months ago, in early spring, and the puddles, we were left early enough, the puddles were all frozen, and I was fascinated by this natural geometry that had occurred in all these puzzles. It probably took me a half an hour to go 50 feet because I kept stopping, and another couple walked by me. They could not figure out what I was doing, and when I explained to them how cool the puzzles were, they finally looked down because they were looking ahead. They were looking at all the beautiful scenery. They weren't looking like right under their feet, and they were fascinated when I pointed these puddles out. You know, everybody's probably seen the fiddlehead part of the fern, and you know, it's just, there's so many interesting things if you just look a little bit closer to what's around. And sometimes when I'm out, what's the light going to be like, or is there a different angle that I can find a photo from? It's just, to me, it's very fascinating. This picture across the top, some of you might recognize it, or it looks vaguely familiar, but you can't quite place it. Hopefully you recognize it. This is the Bridgers, and this is the painting that is on the Welcome to Bozeman signs that you will see. This one I took at East Main. There's also one on North 7th. I think there's one on North 19th, and there's probably one somewhere over on Huffine as it turns into Main Street. There's probably one over there. So this book in general it's a scavenger hunt. You are given a clue and you have to figure out where it is. And the scavenger hunt has been in my brain forever. When I was very young, my mother would often do scavenger hunts for us. And whether we were trying to find a Christmas stocking or a birthday present, and of course there's always Easter when people are finding Easter eggs and getting to an Easter basket, it's all very exciting. And I started doing scavenger hunts for our children when they were very young, particularly for their Christmas stockings, because just to hang the stocking up and go find it on the mantle or whatever just seemed too pedestrian to me. I had to do something different. And as the years went by, their scavenger hunts had to get progressively more complex because they got smarter. So, but I always loved doing them. And our book, as I said, it's a scavenger hunt, and how it works is if you have the book or you want to purchase it, the front part of the book are photos that I took up close of some feature around Bozeman that I found. So for instance, if you see this picture, it's number 29, you have to figure out where that is. And then in the middle of the book, I have a map, and you can see that number 29 is right there. And then if you want more information, you go to the back part of the book where Paul, I've made a photo, and then Paul has given you the history of the building where this image comes from. So that's kind of how the book is laid out. When our son, when he was about 10 years ago, he spent a year in Germany. That was his first year away from home at Christmas time. And at Christmas, I really wanted to come up with some things that we could send him that would be things that he would have gotten if he were home. So I put a box together and had the pajamas and all the standard Christmas paraphernalia. But I'm like, how can I send him a scavenger hunt? How can I do that? And so it crossed my mind. Then I went, oh, I can do a scavenger hunt. I will just send photos up close and tight of the things that he knows, whether they're in our house, a neighbor's house, or places that he was familiar with. I would put that all together. It ended up being a Shutterfly book, and it just was photos of things that he should recognize in some way. Now, I will admit, this is where it started, and this might not be a photo that he would have recognized right off, but I always thought this was such a cool piece of graffiti. This is, or it was, in the underpass of I-90. As you go north on Wallace, you cross the railroad tracks, you go left, you go under the overpass, and you go out toward what is now the community park. This was there for a very long time. I went back not long after I took this photo, and it had been painted off. It was gray. So it made me think that the city had decided it was graffiti. They didn't want it. They painted it, which is really interesting because now if you go to that same underpass, it is plastered with all kinds of colorful graffiti, which I love because it's a transient form of artwork. So anyway, this was the photo that started off our son's book. So I started thinking about this book, and I really liked the concept of doing something like this for Bozeman. I didn't want it to be just a picture book. I couldn't use a lot of the photos that I'd given our son, but of course they were familiar to us or to him, and they might not have been familiar to other people. I didn't really want to use a lot of businesses because I didn't want to have to deal with, you know, talking to the businesses, telling them, and I didn't want to give credit to any business. So I just started taking photos. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, maybe some sort of history. So this is a collage, I guess, of all the photos I've taken. Plus there's probably about a dozen or so that aren't here because I took them and then I immediately threw them away because I knew they wouldn't work. So this is where Paul and I started. Again, it's been percolating in my head. So I made our sons about 10 years ago. Excuse me, 10 years ago. The idea has been percolating along for a while. I thought about the history thing. I talked to Paul a little bit because I hate to admit this to this particular group, but I am not a huge history fan, but I love visual things. And I talked to Paul, who is my history guy, and he seemed to think it was a good idea, but we were both working pretty much full time. We didn't have a lot of time to dedicate it. And then lo and behold, whoop, the pandemic hit. So suddenly we're stuck at home, and it was the perfect time to start kind of working on this. So we start out with this many photos plus about a dozen or so more, and there had to be ways for us to cut it down. So the first thing we did was we cut out everything that wasn't traditional kind of history that spoke to why or where Bozeman is. So a lot of those things got cut. There were some things, so I showed you the bike photo that I wanted to have in my son's book. When we started this book, this was the photo I needed to have in this book. I didn't even care what the history was. Turned out that the history of this particular building is very interesting. I'm not going to tell you where it is, but the thing I like about this photo is I love the vertical lines, and I love that the reflection in those vertical pieces give you a really big clue of where this building is. And I just love this photo. So this starts out the book. So we had, as I said, we had to go through and start cutting out. The first things we cut out were things that weren't traditional history. Now, of course, yesterday is history for us, but we just went back through this book or my photos. This is one of the community gardens. This one happens to be just off of Kagi. It has these beautiful cut metal plates, and I really had fun taking photos of it, but I knew it wasn't the right kind of history and it was going to get nixed. So that didn't make it. Another one I really liked was, a lot of you, in fact, probably all of you have walked across this bridge several times, was the bridge at the bottom of Linley Park. The sledding hill is right there. I love the twisting metal of the railing. It's just a really lovely piece of art. Now, I will say that if this book does well, my next one is going to be Wherefore Art Thou in Bozeman? And because I have found a lot of really beautiful artwork that I'm sure a lot of people have never seen. I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, but I took a lot of pictures of we have a lot of historical homes in Bozeman, and I took a lot of pictures of them. And a lot of them, of course, had to get cut. And this was one that I held on to until the very end, when I knew that its history was a little too, it just wasn't that interesting in terms of, it was just a building. But so I don't know if this really rings a bell with anyone. So I'm going to give you another clue of where this particular rose came from. But this lovely gate. And I was excited to find this gate because I've lived here for 20 plus years. I had never seen this gate until about a year ago when I was walking through town, and I was very excited to find it. I don't know if anybody can recognize the house that's way back in there. And I'm going to say something else about these photos that I've been taking at this point, was when I took the photo, these close-up photos I was taking had to be unique enough to that one particular structure that it wasn't going to lead somebody to a different house. It had to be something that was unique to that one place or building, so that was the only place they could find it. A lot of the photos I had a hard time taking pictures of when I found out it had enough historical significance that it needed to be in the book for me to take the right photo of it. So anyway, so here we have this beautiful gate. I still love this house. And this is it right here. And this is actually Eugene Graff's house. It's on West Cleveland. It's on West Cleveland. I always call it the skinny door house because it has this oddly really thin front door, has a beautiful mansard roof, has a flat on top, has these wonderful round windows. The backyard you can see is a whole nother city block. There used to be a pool there. I find this house just so interesting because it doesn't seem like a Bozeman house in any way, but it did eventually have to go by the wayside because there were other more important history things that we had to do. A couple other things that got cut that did have some historical reference. The Hamel Apartments on East Main. I really love this structure because I love this front door. I love the patterns that were made in the metal grate. It was beautiful. And then you can, of course, see a lot of the line work that's in the concrete that forms the structure. It might look vaguely familiar, perhaps like the Armory or the Wilson, because all three of those buildings were designed by the same person, a name I'm sure you've heard before, and is quite prolific in Bozeman, and Fred Wilson. So he designed this building, and like I said, I just love that door, but it had to go out of the book. Another one that I had to give up on was the Montana Gift Corral. I really liked it because I love the fact that right above the front, right here, was the name of the building and when it was built, which I just loved. We had originally thought this was the oldest surviving structure on Maine, but Paul found out that there was another building that was a little bit older. So unfortunately, this one got cut off as well. Although I do love this photo because, as you'll recall, back in 2009, we had that big natural gas explosion. This part of the block was destroyed over here. So this is all new. And I just love how this new building towers over this tiny little bit of history that we have. And then Paul and I also went through what best represents certain buildings. Again, I try really hard not to tell you which building this is, but said building has a lovely wrought iron railing. And I love the shadow it made across this horizontal planking of the boardwalk, but Paul didn't think it really spoke to what the building was. And so then I looked at this crenellated top, which was really cool, but I already had a lot of brickwork in the book, so I was trying really hard not to use that. And Paul finally convinced me that we needed to go back and take a photo of some bars that were across a window. This is an instance where I kept saying, if I'm going to do this again, I'm going to get a drone pilot to come with me, because a lot of these things I wanted to take. I actually was doing some rather odd things to get photos. This one was one of the photos. This one I actually went into, not to give it away, I went into a building nearby and begged them during COVID to let me go in and look out the window so I could take a photo of it. And then another building we had some photo issues with a little bit. Again, I'll tell you where this is. Maybe it's quite obvious, but this is a building and a window. And this was a photo I was going to use to represent the building. But right before we sent it to print, I was out looking up at the walls and I noticed these little pieces that were on the side, and there were actually several of them, and most of them were in pretty poor repair, and it looked like some of them had totally fallen off. This, I think, might be a violin, but it has a really long neck. I have no idea what this is. I showed them to Paul, and in the short period of time that we had left before the book went to print, he just couldn't find anything on them. So we stuck with the windows instead. Cemetery is another place where we had some different options. I was particularly taken by Mary Blackmore's story, and if a little plug here, if Extreme History does their cemetery tour this fall, it's really cool, which is something coming from a non-history person. So anyway, I was particularly taken by Mary Blackmore's story. I love the triangle shape of her gravestone, all that kind of stuff. There were others that were just really interesting looking. This one has a really great graphic right there of a hand with a heart in it, which I thought was really cool. But we ended up settling on, of course, John Bozeman, because it's very central to the start of Bozeman. So we kept that one. This, I'll tell you where this one is. This is Misco Mill. I love this photo. To me, it's just really strong and graphic, and it kind of reminds me of some sort of weird creature going in to get water. I just loved it. I was very excited to use it. But last summer, we actually went to the Parade of Sheds on the north side of town. And we were talking to a gentleman there, and he was talking about Misco. We had mentioned Misco Mill, and he was saying, oh yeah, there was a fight scene from a river runs through. It was filmed there, which we kind of knew about that. And he said, yeah, there's a plaque there somewhere to Robert Redford. And right away we look at each other and we go, oh my gosh, we have to find that. We have to put that in the book. So we had to nix this photo, which I liked a lot, but we did find the plaque to Robert Redford. So that excited us. So that's why that is in there. We had to have something from MSU. Paul was particularly excited about the idea of doing Romney. And Romney is a great place. It has beautiful brickwork, all sorts of great photo opportunities for me. But I felt that Romney already had enough attention, and I was trying to give attention to another building. I briefly thought about Montana Hall, but again, very expected for MSU. And having worked at Extension, I knew that this building, which is Taylor Hall, was the oldest building on campus. Now, it doesn't have a lot of interesting architectural features to it, but because I knew it was the oldest building on campus, I really insisted that we needed to use this one. So we did. Now, these are things that did not show up in the book, but I think what's really interesting is how people do try to maintain our history or the traditions of our area. So some of you might recognize this orca whale on the left. That is on Bridger Canyon Drive on the way out to Bridger Bowl. And again, a lot of you might know that when you go skiing at Bridger Bowl, you try to ignore looking at this orca whale, but on the way back, if you've had a good day, you salute it. And I always loved it. I always loved this whale. I always, as we would drive it over the years, I could see that it was falling apart. I actually managed to get a picture of it when it still had a dorsal fin. The dorsal fin fell off a while ago. But I always thought it would be an interesting project for a civic group to go talk to the neighbors or talk to the people that own the house and maybe bring it down and try to remodel it. And then I think the house was sold and it was bought by somebody else. And then suddenly the whale disappeared altogether. And I thought, okay, new owner, whale's gone. And then all of a sudden a new whale came up and I was very excited until, as our daughter pointed out, that it was no longer an orca whale, it's now a beluga whale. And at first I was really disappointed. I'm like, yay. I love the fact that the owners are trying to keep the history and the tradition of this Bridger Bowl thing up, but you used the wrong whale. But then I started thinking about it, and the orca whale is important to my generation. It's important to my kids' generation or our kids' generation. But the next generation down, they're going to be the beluga people. They'll salute the beluga whale on their way home, and it's the Bridger beluga. So, you know, it works in the end. Something else that I thought was interesting is the Ellen. Ellen was built in 1919. And I'm not sure how this happened, but they ended up losing the original awning and putting up a different one. The one on the right is what the Ellen raised they did a lot of fundraising, and they were able to put back in a replica of the original awning from 1919. And I will give them kudos for that. It's super cool that they were able to do that. I will say for me that I miss the blue gaudy awning that's on the left. It also is historical. It's not as old. It wasn't original, but it did have a really, to me, an interesting historical feel to it from probably the 30s or 40s. I don't know what happened to that awning. I don't know if it's sitting in storage somewhere, if it went to the recycler, but it's an interesting, when I look at this is an interesting contrast between maintaining one history at the sake of a different history, you know, and like I said, the Ellen has gone back to the original awning, which is appropriate, but, you know, I also missed the awning on the left, which also had an interesting historical reference. Some other things that have happened, you all will recognize the armory on the left that was, well, read the book, you'll find out when it was built. Anyway, armory, it's an armory. So of course the walls are super thick. It's a very strong building. And as you know, it sat empty for a long time. I remember our daughter had ballet in there. At least they did nutcracker practices or something in there for a while. It had Latinga was in there for a while, and it was empty for a while. And there was talk of pulling it down, but I think they realized that an armory is a very difficult thing to pull down because it's built to hold big things that can blow up. Finally became a hotel. And I will say that while the hotel is tall and, you know, a lot of people don't like that thing that's happening to Bozeman, but I do appreciate that they kept the original building and they took a lot of the architectural things that make it unique. Yeah, it's a big square concrete building, but it has those lovely chevrons in it. It's got a lot of history to it, and they've moved those into the new structure as well, which I like. On the left, you can see the old Durston House. And this is an interesting building. It's actually, of course, it's in the book, and Paul will tell you a little bit more about it. When we first moved here, and actually even until it became Headwaters, it was the quirkiest building. It would, you know, it was a private residence. It was abandoned for a while. It looked like maybe a spa was in there for a while. There have been peacocks living there that we could hear all the time. And then when Headwaters bought it, I was a little bit sad because they had to take out a lot of the trees that were on the property for various reasons. They, I always think of the song, I forget the artist, but they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. So there we go. But it's understandable why they had to do that. But what I do appreciate about what they did here was they took the old structure and they gave some of that flavor to the new building. So they did pay homage to what, you know, what was here originally, which I, again, historically can appreciate that, even if I'm not a big history fan. I think knowing where we came from and being able to maintain that is really important. So here's a couple things that I'm a little bit worried about that are in the book. The BJ Grain, right across the street from the library. I love this building. It's just beautiful. A little cricky and old. And but when I used to work at the library, I'd be shelving and I could look across the street to the BG Grain elevator. It was just fun, and the pigeons would fly in and out of it. It was lovely. I'm sure it's sitting on a very valuable piece of property that developers are salivating over to get their hands on, but I will be sad when that happens, because having something like this right in our downtown really, to me, gives homage to where we came from, you know, what the start of Bozeman was, and I'll be sad if/when it goes away. There, of course, is Story Mill, which I think everybody knows the story of Story Mill. it is for sale. Maybe it's already sold. Paul might be able to answer a little bit better. I'm not sure what can be done with this, even if they were to find a buyer, you know, how we can maintain it. Let's see, here it is. I'm going to read this to you. It says, a Montana Preservation Alliance called Story Mill one of the most endangered historic places in the state. So hopefully that gives it a little bit more presence. People will be more attuned to trying to keep those things alive. Most of you know that across the street is the stockyard and the cafe that hasn't been working for quite some time. I'm a little concerned what might be happening there. It's a great historical little place, but the property has been rezoned. I think they might be building out there. I know the owner is trying to keep the historic flavor. We'll kind of see. Life of Montana sign on the east end of the city. You can see this from the freeway. I love this sign. I think when we first moved here 20 something years ago, it was still lit up. Even though Life of Montana hasn't been there for decades, the sign stayed. And when I went to take the first photo, which is in the book, but I could tell it was a little worse for wear. And when I went back just this week to take this photo of it here, these letters are just plywood, and they have, or they had, you probably can't see most of it anymore, but there was just neon in it. You can see the A is the last one with the frame still on it. You can see the piece of plexiglass that covered it is on the ground. So pretty sure that's going to fall off soon, but you know, maybe I need to start a campaign, save our sign or something. But I love this sign as well. Again, it's just one of those interesting historical features that makes Bozeman unique. So, and then there are 3 things that are in the book that are already gone. The Gallatin Cleaner sign, which is on Babcock and Black, we think. I only used one little letter of the sign, so you won't see the sign actually in the book, but there's one letter from the sign in the book. The building itself, it looks like they're trying to save the facade, and they're putting a different, I don't know what they're putting in there, but they're working on it, but they've kept the facade up, which I'm very happy about. The sign has disappeared. I don't know what's going to happen to it. I hope they'll put it back up. I hope they'll be like some other towns and cities we've been to where they've realized the importance of some of these old signs and they leave them on the building. And the building will either take something from the old business and use it in their name, or they'll just leave it up there because of the historical significance it has to the community. This is the door from the Durston House, which is now Headwaters Academy. It is also gone, which makes me sad. Paul will tell you a little bit more about this. And then this is photo number 51. I had this one in the book very prominently displayed until January, when I was walking downtown, and I walked right by where this is, and all of a sudden I realized, wait, am I in the wrong block? And I turned around to go back and see if I was in the wrong place, but I was in the right place, but this tile work was now gone. And in its place is just a piece of concrete. It's in the same shape as the tile, but the tile itself has been removed. And that made me, it made me very sad to see that happen as well. The tile wasn't particularly historic. It had been there for a couple decades, but it was not well maintained. It was falling apart. And I think the next people that bought the building and the city just went, too much work, we're pulling it out. So anyway, I'm hoping that with this book, people are learning some history and they're taking a closer look at where they live and can appreciate things that, like I said, is they're visual white noise and things that people don't notice anymore, but you really can learn a lot from just stopping and taking a look, looking down, looking closer, looking up. There's a lot of cool things you could learn. So, and with that, I will turn it over to Paul. He's Mr. History.
Just to add real quick to the story regarding the tile on the walk, when she was walking downtown and she saw it, it was literally, the text I got was no, there were 11 O's after the end, and then exclamation marks and everything like that. And then there was the picture. I mean, it was very disappointing. I mean, obviously from you know, what we had learned about it and certainly what it represented in Bozeman. The other thing I wanted to say was keep the image of that door in mind, because I'm going to come back to that. And again, remember that Susan is the photographer, and so her picture of the door is much nicer than when I'm going to show you. But the door is actually, think of it as in three pieces. There you have as a Dutch door. You have the top and you have the lower section, and then you have a wonderful lion head knocker on the top. Before I start, I just wanted to extend a big thank you to, and this is on behalf of Susan and I, to Crystal and Extreme History. Working on this book, we found ourselves asking a lot of people a lot of questions, and Crystal, as she mentioned earlier, was one of those people that I could ask a lot of questions to, and she always seemed to have the time. And if you haven't experienced one of Extreme History's walking tours, I highly recommend them. It was also Extreme History's sponsoring of Leslie Gilmore, and I understand, Leslie, you might be on this evening, but anyway, your wonderful virtual talk on that Life of Montana building, as well as an article for Bozeman Magazine. Crystal wrote for on the McDonald House that added a lot of information to those features for us. And if you've not seen the soiled doves, both inside and outside the Extreme History Project, you know, stop by their building on Mendenhall. And again, as Crystal mentioned, the bookstore there, but the soiled doves, and ask to see the soiled doves inside the house, because I think it's worth a visit. It is the tours, and it's the talks, and it's the events like tonight that truly make history more interesting, accessible, and relevant to the general public. And we're glad that all of you could join us tonight. And Susan, I mean, I just want, you know, as I saw you go through those things, I think you're starting to like history. Just saying.
Visual.
Now back to the book. Susan asked me a lot of questions about the subject matter of the photography. If you can remember that collage of photography that she did before. And that was ultimately the basis for how we began collaborating on Where in Bozeman. Long before we ever got started on a book, though, Susan was very persistent on asking what this round feature is on the west facade of what is now the Rocky Mountain Rug Gallery downtown. It turned out to be the very first of what we eventually whittled down to those 51 items that are now in the book. For me, it was a rough start, as she mentioned, because even today, with the book in print, I still don't know what that darn thing is or what it was used for. The Rug Gallery, the fellow who owns that, who also owns the building, and he also owns, as I learned from Extreme History, the old brothel that happens to be in the alley behind there. But anyway, he has been asked that question numerous times and has not been able to come up with the answer. And he anxiously awaits for someone to perhaps come in the door and tell him what that darn thing was used for. We do know that that building was constructed in 1928 to be a Montgomery Ward store, when Montgomery Ward started branching out of catalogs and doing the brick and mortar. For over 90 years, this building has primarily had businesses offering home furnishings of some kind, including the Vaughn store that you see pictured here. And this is from probably the early 1980s. And then another important thing, as you can see next to each of the Montgomery Ward and Vaughn's, you have the Rock and R Bar. And that has kept a steady presence next door to that building all these years. And they moved into that location in the late 1940s. I even was thinking this afternoon, well, maybe they're pushing kegs through there and then, you know, walking around to the Rock and R Bar. This photo, on the other hand, was taken yesterday. Whoops. Let's see. Oops, I had a, yeah. The photo of the round feature on the wall that I took is much less attractive than Susan's. And it looks like maybe some insulation got put in there into some of the cracks. And again, if anybody knows, and I know there's some people on this lecture this evening that I have asked this question to before, but if anybody happens to know, you can either send us a note or send Extreme History Project a free copy of Where in Bozeman, and perhaps a beverage of your choice at the Rock and our await for anybody who we can figure out what the story behind this is. I represent, as Susan mentioned, the history part of the book. And with that, I'll start now with that very same northeast corner of Main Street and Bozeman Avenue where we have the Mystery Circle. Incidentally, if you were to use this book like a scavenger hunt, many of the photographed features can be found just a short walk from this corner. Before Montgomery Ward's was built, this was the site of the Metropolitan Hotel, later called the Laclede Hotel, perhaps early day Bozeman's finest accommodations. This iconic early Bozeman photo, which you may have seen before, is from the 1870s, taken from the second floor deck and looking west down Main Street. Main Street is still many years from being paved, and parking your prairie schooner downtown appears to have been a challenge back then as well. The large two-story structure you see in the background across the street is the Cooper and Black Building, Bozeman's first brick building, built in 1872, 1 year before the Harper Building, which is the building that Susan pointed out earlier. Osborne's drugstore on the right side of the photo is in what was at the time the oldest commercial building in Bozeman, which was built in 1964, the same year the town was founded. It's not real clear, but I really like this photo. Since completing our book, I kind of feel like the guy that's standing on the deck, looking out across the town. His view is kind of the way I now see downtown. There's a lot of Bozeman history that's very visible from this spot. This photo, on the other hand, was taken just yesterday in the rain from street level on the same corner. Lots, of course, has happened in the last 150 years, and much more will undoubtedly change in the years ahead. Just beyond the tree in the middle of the screen, you can see Cooper and Black, Bozeman's very first brick building, as I mentioned, from 1872. It still remains, or at least most of it. The brick building on the white building, the white bank building, took out probably about a third of the Cooper Black building when that was constructed in 1972. Now you can just make out a brick building. There's actually a couple of pedestrians in the walk, and there's a little bit of a brick building there. That was the site of Osborne's drugstore. And that brick building that's there now that hosts the Gallatin Lodge number 6. It's also the location of the wonderful horse that is above Bangtail Bikes there on Main Street. But anyway, that brick building was built in 1883. 1883, for those of you that are really into Bozeman history, 1883 was a big year because that was the year that the Northern Pacific Railroad finally came to Bozeman. So the title of the book is Where in Bozeman. Susan got the where part down pretty good, and she knows where she took all her photos. Incidentally, this is the photo of her, a photo I took of her taking a picture of the bars on the building that she mentioned earlier. And I can feel her saying, "Don't say any more. You're giving away all the answers." But anyway, it was her idea to provide the what. What are the stories behind these images? Historians, and certainly anyone with an interest in history, often refer to this kind of research as rabbit holes. most of the stories behind Susan's photo subjects did in fact turn into rabbit holes for me. And there are a couple from the book I wanted to take a little bit of extra time to point out. When you see the book, there are photographs of features on a number of locations, private homes and buildings that are around Bozeman, much of them extremely well documented. The works, as she mentioned, of Bozeman architect Fred Wilson, as an example, is very well represented in the book. Susan had zeroed in on a few other unique houses in South Bozeman that I enjoyed, along with the rabbit holes that research triggered. This log cabin at the corner of South 3rd and Garfield Street was the catalyst for one. The 2018 real estate listing for this cabin, when it last sold, stated that this Yellowstone Park replica cabin was built in 1950 by the MSU Architectural Department as part of a 3-home project depicting different styles of homes located in the city, unquote. It was a start for me and it sounded interesting. The cabin was actually built in 1934 by an engineering professor at Montana State College who came here by way of Indiana, and his name was Edward R. Dye. There was no official connection with the college, and there was no official connection with any department at the college. Everyone called him ER. In addition to teaching at the college, starting in 1929, ER served as the assistant park engineer for Yellowstone National Park, which he did for 7 consecutive summers all throughout the Great Depression in the 1930s. I think his cabin design was heavily influenced by his Yellowstone experience. The former Madison Museum log building near the confluence of the Gibbon and Firehole rivers, which was built in 1930, is pictured here. And this cabin was put here by the Park Service because it was very close to here where in the 1870s, the Washburn expedition, members of the Washburn expeditions first raised the idea of creating America's first national park. But anyway, I think there are, as I walk around that building and as I've seen of this log cabin on South 3rd, a lot of influences. In 1938, the cabin was featured in American Home magazine, a national magazine, which I was able to obtain a copy of. If you look at the end of the newspaper article there on the left side, you'll see the comment there that Professor Dye recently announced he intended to construct another home in the south part of town. This one will have, as one feature, a sod roof. So, some of you that have been around might remember the sod roof. I don't think there's been a sod roof there for probably about 15 years now. Basically, these are ER's 2 other houses that he built here in Bozeman. The one with the sod roof was removed about 15 years ago. It was actually the 3rd house that Professor Dye built in Bozeman. The second home he built is on Garfield, and it's directly across the street from the log cabin and right next door to the sod roof house. What's unique about this house is it is constructed from used brick Professor Dye obtained for $3 a truckload when the original Gallatin County Courthouse on Main Street was torn down in 1933. This home has the unique weeping mortar bricklaying style, which caught Susan's eye and camera lens long before we ever knew anything about the house. With his 3 houses, 2 of which are featured in Where in Bozeman, I just had to learn more about E.R. Dye. It turns out he has 2 sons, one living in Vermont and one living in the Seattle area. The older son has memories of living in the cabin, the construction of the brick and sod roof houses, spending time in Yellowstone National Park, and attending the new Longfellow Elementary School, which opened in 1939. I had a chance to actually sit down with the younger brother, Ned, who had never lived in Bozeman, but was able to share a lot of information about his father, who died in 1961. When I asked Ned about his father's summer work in Yellowstone National Park, he gave me his father's file on a wonderful foot and horse bridge that crosses the Yellowstone River as part of the Black-tailed Deer Trail. Susan and I hiked the trail and up to the bridge just last week. Although we've been to the bridge before, being able to read E.R. Dye's report on its construction 85 years ago really added to the overall experience. As you can see, that bridge still looks like it's in pretty good shape. Dye's biggest contribution, though, came after World War II and after he had left Montana State College. Most of the latter part of his career was dedicated to automobile safety. When he worked at Cornell Laboratories in New York, his design team there developed a crash-resistant vehicle that later became a part of the Smithsonian Institution's collection. According to his sons, E.R. Dye had 16 registered patents, nearly all having to do with some aspect of safety, and he continued to be recognized for his work years and years after he died. It really is quite a legacy. And again, it all started with a cabin here in South Bozeman. Rabbit hole number 2. So we'll go back to the Durston home, because this one we've seen a lot of recent information. Headwaters Academy is going to be starting here at the end of this month. And this will be the first term where the students have attended in the new buildings there. The Durston home, it's right on Durston Road, namesake for one of the most powerful newspaper publishers in Montana in the late 19th and 20th century, Dr. John H. Durston. He ran Copper King Marcus Daly's newspaper out of Anaconda. In 1902, Dr. Durston and his wife Mary's daughter, Laura, married John Maxey of Bozeman. As wedding gifts, Maxey's parents gave the couple about 5 acres of land, while Laura's parents basically gifted them with this brand new, then, log home. Most of the wedding gifts from their friends involved items that went into the house, including that lovely oak Dutch door that Susan's picture was much better. Hopefully you have that embedded in your mind there. And Susan was also the one that noticed, kind of like with the tile, kind of like with the laundry sign downtown, she noticed a few weeks ago, the door was gone. The door went missing. And of course, this was a door, we've already gone to print. We've already got the door in there. That door, it turns out, was actually 3 wedding gifts, as I pointed out from her photo. And you can see in the top part there, the old door. But anyway, the upper part, which is in the front, the lower part of the oak Dutch door, and then the lion head knocker. 120 years ago, or almost 120 years ago, 120 years ago next year, those were wedding gifts for Laura Durston and John Maxey when they moved in there. Dr. and Mary Durston later bought the house from their daughter and son-in-law, along with additional land from the Maxeys, and for years used the home and the larger ranch as a retreat from the pressures of his job in Anaconda and View. As Susan mentioned, Headwaters Academy bought the Durston home and land. I stopped by that campus, as I mentioned earlier this week, and that's where they're putting on all the final touches. They're going very hard in getting this school in preparation to welcome the first students later this month. The old wedding present door, which you see there, which had been in place for nearly 100 years, just happened to be right inside the new door that they have there. The good news is with this door is that, all of the components there, the Headwaters Academy have been talking to descendants of the Durstons and the Maxeys who actually happen to live in that neighborhood. And it looks like those doors are going to be going back to the family. Well, that's it. Basically brings us back to Bozeman and the Gallatin Valley. As you probably saw from, what Susan presented, there's really no unique features in this area, and with this associated with this wonderful history that is sacred, and especially given our continued growth and changes that that are happening in our community. So thank you all for your time this evening and for letting Susan and I share a little of our passion, as well as a few stories with you this evening. And with that, Crystal, we'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Paul and Susan. That was fascinating. So interesting. I love your rabbit holes. That's great. So if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat or in the question and answer. And we will, I'll pass that on to Paul and Susan. We do have some clapping going on. So yay. That was wonderful. That was a wonderful presentation, so interesting. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, if anyone has questions, I'll just let everyone know that the book, if you want to get a hold of the book and buy a copy of the book, we have copies at the Extreme History Project location on Mendenhall Street at 234 East Mendenhall, and we are open on Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays. So come on in and get a copy of the book. It's just great. It's just wonderful. It has so much history, so much historic architecture of Bozeman in it. There are also copies at the Gallatin History Museum, which is located at 317 West Main Street. So either of those two locations, you could pick it up. Of course, we'd love you to come to Extreme History and grab it. So that would be wonderful. But it's a great book, and it's so nice to be able to use it to better understand Bozeman history and to really have a way to go out and explore in downtown Bozeman, but also throughout all of Bozeman itself. Okay, any questions, comments? I'm not seeing too many questions and comments, so we'll just wait for one more second here to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask if they want to ask. I'll just tell everyone once again that this is being recorded, and it's going to show up tomorrow on our Extreme History Project YouTube page. So you can just Google the Extreme History Project YouTube and you will find us. So thanks so much, Paul and Susan, for doing this tonight. We are having a lot of people saying, thanks, great presentation. Thanks for sharing, enjoyed it. So thank you guys for the presentation tonight, but also for writing this wonderful book. It's a great way into Bozeman history. So thanks so much. And thanks to everyone out there for coming tonight. And we do now have a couple questions. One is from Russell Johnson. Once people get this and start sending in photos to tease you, you'll need to do a second volume. Yeah, we were talking the other day, and Susan, I think you have ideas for other volumes in your mind already, and I can see a whole bunch of these books. And Susan, were you going to be at the farmers market at all coming up with the books?
We're gonna try to go this next Tuesday.
Okay.
If I'm there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So anybody that's in Lindley next Tuesday, I mean, if they wanted to stop by and chat a little bit more, chat history. Don't talk to her. You want to talk photographs?
Yeah, there we go. Art, history, photographs, all those things. It's all mixed together, really. That's how it works. But yeah. And so the Bozeman Farmers Market Tuesday, look for Paul and Susan, and they'll have the books on a table. So you can also get it there with them. Susan, maybe you could just go through, we have a question from Bertie about how the book is organized. So maybe just go through that again and talk a little bit about how the book is organized.
In terms of how I organize the photos themselves, It's just what I thought looked good on a page. Like if there's a page with a bunch of numbers, there's another spread that's things that are circular. There's another spread with things that are metal. So I kind of organized the pages in that, you know, if you're asking about just the pages themselves. But the book itself, when you open it up, the first half of the book are the photos that I took that are like the up close and personal photos, where you have to look, it's like you have to figure out where that picture was taken, like the soiled dove. It's like, okay, where was that soiled dove? And then the middle part of the book, I actually put in a map. So, and there's each photo is numbered. So if you want to know where, for instance, the soiled dove is number 29, you could go to the middle part of the book where the map is, and you can see number 29, and you can see it on the map, and you can see where it is if you were trying to walk to it. And then you turn the page again, and the back part of the book is all the little, for me, one of the things, my goals in this book was to make it short, palatable history for someone like me who could pick it up and just quickly read it. So the last half of the book, or the last part of the book, is the history that Paul wrote. So photo 29 is the soiled dove. And then you go to the map, and 29 is located here. And then you go to the back part of the book, and it'll say 29. It'll show you a photo of the building where that image came from. And then Paul's history of the book will be in the back. So it's visuals in the front, history in the back, I guess is how it works. Map in the middle.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. And just a reminder, if anyone knows what that circle is, there's a free book and a beer in it for you, or a drink of your choice.
Might even go with a mixer on it. And you know, maybe we'll, you know, anybody walking downtown, you know, go take a look at it again. Oftentimes, I think it seems like every time Susan and I go downtown for something, we always end up going and just, I don't know. It's really, it's kind of a bad thing. We just kind of stare at the circle. I know we dragged you over there, Crystal, saying, what is that? What is that?
It's in all the photos. Some
Yeah.
of the older photos, if you look at them, I don't think I see the circle. So it's like a mystery thing they put in there just to tease us or something. I don't know.
I know. Every time I go by it now, I look at it and think, what is that?
What the heck?
That's wonderful. So Leslie Gilmore asked, have you been on the inside of the building, the Montgomery Ward building where the circle is? Have you seen it from the inside at all?
That's a good question, Leslie. I was hoping when I went back there to talk to the owner that he would allow me back, you know, back there, and you know, maybe, you know, there were you know, he needed somebody to kind of keep an eye on the front. I kind of poked my head back in there, but yeah, I didn't get as far as, I know Leslie would have gotten right in there.
She would have.
She would have. It's worth a beer, Leslie.
Elizabeth says, is a window out of the question?
Nope. Everything is wide open.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like I said, you know, there were, you know, I envisioned this little secret conveyor where, you know, if the alleyway was busy, then they could, you know, they could shove the kegs in there and they'd go all the way back and around over to the Rock and R, you know.
It looks like the bottom of a whiskey barrel.
Yeah, and it looks like.
So.
And it looks like, you know, and I think Leslie had given some comment on it too, because the you know, they did a really good job with matching the brick, but as far as Susan and I could tell from either that Montgomery Ward photo or the Vaughn photo, it didn't seem to be there, you know, or you know, certainly a round feature, and it looked like. You know, and I've had the discussion with, you know, Richard Brown, who's, you know, he is the authority on Fred Wilson, and this is a Fred Wilson designed building, designed specific to House Montgomery Ward, and they intentionally wanted a very blank wall. In fact, that's probably one of the least ornate walls in downtown Bozeman, facades in downtown Bozeman, but just about everything on that wall is square or rectangular. You know, it has right angles. And then all of a sudden there's, and again, I could have lived here for 80 years. I never would have seen it. And that's the kind of thing that she sees that is like, really? You know, and I think probably 5 years ago, she's going, what is that? What is that? What do you think that is? What is that? And
That's great.
I still get asked that. I'd love to answer that someday.
Yeah. Well, if anyone out there figures it out, send us an email and let us know. Or if anyone has any ideas, send us an email and let us know. But thank you again, Paul and Susan, for the presentation tonight. And thanks so much for doing this book. And I encourage everyone to come in and get a copy and then go out and explore historic Bozeman. So thanks, everyone. And Paul and Susan, thank you guys so much again, and have a good evening, everyone. And come on a walking tour. All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul and Susan.